Hi, everybody. This is David Forrest from Collaborative Gain. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Today's webinar is called Coach, Diplomat, Advocate, and Architect, the four archetypes of the complete design leader. Peter Merholz is the VP of Design at Snagajob and just one of the great thought leaders in the design world. Peter co-founded the user experience and design firm Adaptive Path in 2001. Peter is also the co-author of the book Org Design for Design Orgs, which I recommend for everybody who's on the call today. And as legend has it, the man who originally coined the word blog. Peter, welcome. Tell me about blog. Is that true?
Thank you, David. And yes, it is true. That would have been in 1999 when blogs were first walking the earth. There was already a word called weblog, and as a joke, I contracted it to blog, and it stuck.
Fantastic. I wish you had copyrighted that, right? Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for that and all of your many contributions to the space that we all kind of live in right now. It's our pleasure to have you. Let me turn over to the keys to the city to you, Peter, and we can get started proper with our program.
Thank you, David, for that. And I will just dive right in. As David mentioned, the title of this talk is Coach, Diplomat, Advocate, and Architect. And these are the four qualities, the four archetypes of a design leader. This talk is drawn from my experience over the last 25 years leading design teams, my reflection on my role, how it's changed and evolved from being working primarily in an agency context to moving in-house, as well as conversations with numerous design leaders in various contexts. And as David mentioned, the spur for this, it's there on the bottom there, is the book Org Design for Design Orgs. This is a book I co-wrote with Kristen Skinner. It came out a little over a year ago and is essentially the first book dedicated to helping people figure out how to build and run effective in-house design teams. So for me, the story starts in 2000. When I was the creative director, what we would now call head of design for Opinions, which was one of the kind of dot-com bubble startups of some note. And I had never led a design team before. I had been a designer, I'd been independent, and then when I was hired to run the team. And something that I realized during this experience was the value that I provided as a design leader. Before I had the job and at the outset of having the job, I thought the value that I had as a design leader was, and that's why we see this image here, putting my thumbprints on my team's work, right? I needed to show that I was paying attention and that I was guiding my team's work by putting my thumbprints on it, putting my stamp on it. And what I learned relatively quickly was that actually my team were way better at design than I was, and that my job wasn't putting my thumbprints on the work. My job was essentially running interference, protecting them from the rest of the organization so that they could focus on doing their job. So that was one of my key
I'll bet
insights.
You nobody in the audience can identify with that at all, Peter.
One of my key insights was realizing that it's not about me, but it's about my team and helping my team get what they wanted out. A later experience that I had when I was at Adaptive Path was when we had someone, a new design lead, someone who was leading a project for the first time, and thus had that kind of ownership of the client relationship. And when you do design work, as a designer, where you are, the value that you provide is in your work, is in the craft, is in your ability to make stuff. And in this particular project, they made a lot of stuff, and they were running into challenges with the client. And the initial approach that my design leader took in trying to address the problem was to lean on what had always worked for her in the past, which was make more stuff. If I'm going to design my way out of this, and what I had to coach her on, and what I've seen happen again and again, is that a challenge that design leaders have when they become design leaders, that designers have as they transition into design leaders, is that they fall back on that thing that had been their value in their career, which was the making of stuff. But for leaders, the solution is almost never to make more stuff. The solution is to figure out how to have a better conversation with the people that you're engaging with, to probably reframe the conversation. But it's almost never about just more production. And so that's what this talk is about. It's about helping design leaders recognize that when it comes to the work itself, they have to abide by Obi-Wan Kenobi's suggestion and let go. That it's not about your hands on Sketch or in Photoshop producing. It's about letting go and letting the team do the work, and you figuring out how to support the team as best you can. This is a drawing of Archimedes with the Earth. He's famous for saying, "Give me a lever long enough and I can move the Earth." And for me, I often think about this image and this concept because leadership is about leverage. This is something I learned in my first kind of big in-house gig when I ran Design at Groupon. My boss, the head of product, made it clear that like my value in the organization was leverage, was how I was leveraged through my team, and how I could create a team that could do far more work than I would obviously be able to do or even touch on my own. And so it's important for leaders to, as part of that letting go, to recognize that the value they bring is through leverage, is through how little things they do have these large ripple effects throughout their organization, whether specifically their design team or the broader organization that they're supporting. So in this talk, I'm going to start by discussing kind of 3 key roles that designers have. This DL stands for a design leader, and all design leaders need to be able to manage down. They need to be able to manage their team, get the most out of their team, and that is what I refer to as the coach archetype. Design leaders also need to be able to manage across. They need to be able to work with others, and that is outside of design, and that is what I refer to as the diplomat archetype. And then they need to be able to manage up. They need to be able to engage stakeholders and executives, and that is what I call the advocate archetype. So we're going to dive right in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about being a coach and what it means to get the most out of your team as a design leader and design manager. The thing, as I made a point talking about earlier, the thing to remember is that your team is not simply an extension of yourself. A failing that I think many design leaders have is seeing the team as an extension of themselves, as people who exist to realize your vision, as opposed to a group that from which can emerge a vision even greater than one that you have. And so the first thing you have to do as a leader is check that part of your ego and figure out how you can get the most out of the team. I did mention vision. It is key, even if the point of the team is not to simply realize your vision, you need to work with the team to create a vision for success. And by which I mean not just a concrete vision, though those are important, right? You can imagine prototypes or other visualizations of future state. Teams need that in order to have a sense of the North Star that they're aiming towards, but they also need to have a sense of how do they know when they are successful? How are they being measured? What matters? How do you know that you will have achieved what you set out to? So it's important to focus on outcome, not output. It's, again, not just about delivery of stuff, it's about delivery of value. It's about creating something meaningful. It's also key that throughout this, that the leader maintain optimism, positivity, not let perhaps challenges in the organization get you down, and then that can get your team down. You need to continue to use that vision and that where you're headed as a spur for inspiration and uplift, and help folks on your team maintain their optimism as well. Once you've helped kind of create that vision, once you've helped direct the team have them oriented in the right direction, now they are going to be doing the work it takes to deliver. The job of the coach is to provide guidance along the way. Again, it's not necessarily to do the work, though on a small enough team that you might have a player coach role where you're doing the work as well, but it's definitely to help every team member understand what they need to do in order to realize that goal. And that can involve teaching technique, making sure that you are comfortable enough in aspects of the craft that you can teach those aspects of the craft, or if there are aspects of the craft that are outside your particular area. For example, as you can probably tell by my slides, I do not have a visual design background. Making sure that your team has access to the tools they need, the learning they need in order to continue to improve in those areas of craft. So making sure that they have the tools they need to improve their technique in the various methods. Guidance also takes the form in leading constructive critique, right? And there's a lot that's been written about constructive critique. There's a book called Discussing Design that addresses this actually quite well. But basically, making sure that as you are helping your team figure out how to deliver the best stuff, you are doing so in a constructive manner. You are not simply saying that something is bad, something's not right, it's not delivering what you need, do it over, but framing it, again, using those, that idea of outcome. What is it that we're trying to achieve? How, and then using that as a frame for discussing what's in front of you. How are the designs that you guys are considering, are they or are they not helping you achieve those goals? And by leading constructive critique, having a better conversation about design. And then sometimes the team will just get stuck. And in my experience, when the team gets stuck, it often means you need to reframe the problem. That's kind of addressing the point I made at the outset around design is not about more stuff. Often when the team gets stuck, the team tries to design their way out of it, when in fact it's usually about how do you step back, reframe the problem, think about it differently, and then take a different approach. For example, I led a project, this is back when I was leading projects, I led a project at Adaptive Path for an e-commerce client. And we were doing a bunch of really great design work except on tablet. We wanted to create a tablet experience and we were stuck, and we kept designing at it and we kept getting stuck. And so what I did was I pulled the team off kind of doing work for an hour or two. I think it was about 2 hours. And I said, let's reconsider tablets. This was pretty early on. So the iPad was still this new thing that people were figuring out how to grapple with. I said, let's reconsider what it is we're doing. What do tablets give us? And we got very formalist, and we wrote down all these kind of capabilities of tablets, and we thought differently about the problem, gave ourselves a new foundation, so that when we then started ideating again, it was with this new frame, and we were able to break through. We were able to identify solutions that actually made sense, that we felt good about. So now it's not just about the work though, right? Coaching isn't just about the output that your team is producing, it's about the team itself, right? And so how do you get the team to do their best work? Part of it is to recognize that these are people, not resources. I think too often in our business contexts, we are encouraged to think of our designers as resources, as kind of fungible quantities. And we lose sight of the fact that they're people, that they're humans, that they're individuals, and that you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. What will work in managing, coaching, guiding one person won't necessarily work in managing or coaching others. And you have to figure out how to tailor your engagement with the different members of your team in order to make sure that you are helping each of them. You need to acknowledge their strengths and weaknesses. You can't expect each of them to be a cookie cutter. Some of your designers are going to be stronger visually. Some are going to be stronger with interaction design. Some are going to be stronger with research. That's okay. You want to be clear about that. You want to lean into that. You want to put them together in ways where they're complementing each other. But you need to acknowledge it. You can't ignore it. And obviously, you're going to have to manage egos. Designers are in this kind of tricky balance of, in some ways, they need to kind of be egoless in order to really focus on the work itself, the product, serving the customer, doing what's right by the customer. But design is a creative endeavor, and we put our egos in it when we make. And so figuring out how to manage, helping people manage those that need to feel like they have something to say, something to contribute, but not if they get criticized, that they don't kind of collapse underneath the criticism, and helping manage those egos. Some designers are stronger than this than others, and so you have to kind of figure out how to manage those different egos differently. When building your team, when thinking about your team, you have to recognize the strength and diversity. Too often, a design leader builds a team of people that look just like themselves. When I joined Groupon, I inherited a team, particularly on the product design side, that all looked like the very first head of design, who was a dude in his mid-20s, white dude in his mid-20s, and the design team was essentially a bunch of white dudes in their mid-20s. And when you have such a monoculture within your design team, it inhibits your ability to think broadly. You want people from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different experiences, because all of that will lead to better design work. It's not just the right thing to do from a kind of social cultural standpoint. It actually will lead to better work, because you'll consider broader opportunity spaces. You'll challenge your preconceptions more, and through that challenging, you'll set yourself up for doing a better job of identifying the best solution. It's also crucial as a coach to let your team mess up. Too often design leaders want to step in when they see something that their team is doing that they think they could do better. They'll say, give me those files, let me fix it. And when you do that, you inhibit your team's ability to learn. People learn from their mistakes, and you need to allow them to make those mistakes. And it's really hard sometimes to allow them to make those mistakes. But if you don't, if you swoop in to save them, then they start relying on it. It becomes a crutch for them, and they don't develop the resilience themselves for figuring out how to figuring out how to work through these types of problems on their own. You want to let them make mistakes, and then you want to do some form of a retro that helps them learn how they can improve next time and learn from that mistake. But you can't just let people make mistakes willy-nilly. You do need to hold them accountable. You do need to make sure that you're not letting people slide by. You don't want to just be the nice guy or gal who leads the team, who's friends with everyone. If you're aiming for likability, you're not doing your job, right? You're not getting your team to be the best they can be. You're not getting the individuals on the team to continue to improve. If you simply tell them what you think they want to hear instead of telling them what they ought to hear, this is where concepts like radical candor come into play. If you're familiar with that, radical candor is a true sign of respect, or is a sign of true respect for your team, that you're willing to tell them when they're messing up and help them learn and grow from it. If they are the kinds of designers that you want them to be, they will embrace that, and they will take that on and learn. So you need to make clear what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, because if you do allow your team members to slide, other team members will notice it, and they'll object to it. If they think someone on the team is just kind of skating by while they're really busting their hump to do their best work, that can create a really kind of damaged team culture. If this all sounds like parenting, well, yeah.
Peter, question for you
Sure.
on the coach role. All of this sounds spot on to me. What do you think the people that you're coaching expect out of you as their coach? I mean, in a sports environment, you'll hear how the players want the coach to have their back, and so what does the typical design team member expect out of their coach?
I actually think most design team members don't know what to expect from their coach, and I will be addressing kind of having your back. That's what the advocate archetype is.
Great.
And so I'll touch on that. I hadn't thought about it necessarily in the way you framed it, but I don't think design team members really understand what their coach, their manager, their leader does. I think it's a mystery to them, and so their expectations are usually pretty unsophisticated. They want someone to help them do better design work, help them grow in their careers. That's all reasonable, but I don't think they understand that what they actually want from their design leader are going to be what I address in the other two archetypes, which is a lot of the stuff that happens outside of the design team, but that sets up the design team for doing their best work.
Perfect. Great.
Let me dive into that material.
Sure.
So the next archetype is the diplomat, right? So if the coach is managing down, the diplomat is managing across, working cross-functionally to ensure design's voice in the broader process. Design leadership, this is something that many designers who become design leaders, design managers, have trouble understanding. Design leadership is way more about talking than doing. It's about the relationships that you're building throughout the organization. It's not about your ability to produce in a design tool. And key to this, and key to the success of a design function within any organization, is the design leader's ability to engage with non-designers. They need to be that diplomat, to go talking to product managers, talking to engineers, talking to marketers, talking to salespeople, talking to whomever about what design is, what role it can play, the value it can provide. The second point is maybe should be the first one, because the reason for this is that people still don't really know what design does. Most folks still have a very unsophisticated view of design as making things pretty. And if that continues to be the view that designers or that non-designers have internally in the organization, that's going to restrict the design team's ability to really have an impact and drive value. And so design leaders need to educate the rest of the organization. Now, they need to do so, though, not from a I'm going to tell you perspective, not from a talking down perspective, but this is where the first bullet point comes into play, right? Appreciating their perspectives, recognizing that those folks have their jobs to do and that they're trying to figure out, how to work best with design, but they also have a whole bunch of other things that they're trying to figure out. And so it's important for the designers to be mindful and respectful of their peers' mindsets, and then figure out how to educate kind of given those peer mindsets. Because in order for design to succeed, it needs to be truly a collaboration, particularly in-house. Agency models don't work. If your design team is set up as an internal services firm where requirements come in and comps go out, that is going to fail. And this happens sometimes, particularly with design leaders who come from agency backgrounds, come from design services backgrounds, and they go in-house, and they see their job as kind of protecting design and protecting the quality of design. So they build a moat around design. And they take in those requirements, they do their work, and then they hand them out again as an attempt to protect quality, because there's this concern that if they engage more directly with these other teams, the quality of the designs will be compromised. The problem is that agency model simply doesn't work, because then the design team becomes this entity that the rest of the organization routes around, because it's just too difficult to deal with. And so designers need to figure out how to truly collaborate cross-functionally. Design leaders need to figure out how to prime the rest of the organization for that true collaboration. And designers need to welcome others into their work and make themselves part of others' work and really just be part of that conversation. As a diplomat, a design leader needs to assume positive intent. Your peers will say things to you that will piss you off, that will frustrate you because they don't understand about design, and you can't get in a defensive posture. You can't get into a victim stance. You can't feel like, why me? No one understands us. No one gets me, and kind of wall off, right? Everybody's doing their best in an organization, and you have to recognize that. And if you feel like you're being subject to some type of unfair representation, or that the work of your team is being minimized, you need to assume positive intent and then figure out how you can articulate what it is your team's doing. That said, you do need to stand strong for your ideals. And there's a balance to be struck here, which is why if you can imagine kind of scales on this slide, there's a balance to be struck here. You can't simply roll over in order to accommodate the needs of others. To be a diplomat doesn't mean to be someone who just kind of again rolls over, shows your belly, and is like, fine, whatever you say goes, in order to like make nice. Diplomats fight for what they need. They have ideals, they have principles, and they stand strong for those. So you do need to have a set of principles that you are standing firm on, and that you are articulating, that you're helping other people understand, so that you don't sacrifice the quality of your work or the ability for your team to do its best work. But you don't want to, again, be so dogmatic that you're not able to engage. Diplomacy, key to design diplomacy, and it kind of follows on the standing by your principles, is that we need to keep design weird. Design is a strange function within a corporation. Designers tend to be more empathetic, creative, hard on their sleeves kinds of folks. And that is actually the value we provide, particularly in a new world where every business is turning into a service, and at the heart of service is a human relationship. Designers are actually awesome in their ability to engage with humanity and bring humanity into a corporate practice. And a challenge that I've seen design leaders face and kind of subjugate themselves to is being accommodating, right? And simply following along. The most obvious example is design that simply follows an existing agile methodology, usually one that has been articulated by an engineering group. If design simply sees itself as accommodating to an engineering process, it's not actually delivering the value that design ought to be delivering. Good design doesn't work the same way as you don't arrive at good design the same way you arrive at good engineering. It's a different practice with a different process in order to realize the best out of it. And the value that design brings is being weird, is being different. If designers simply accommodate to existing business practices and kind of fall in line, then the value that we have to bring, the reason we are being brought in, is now being dulled. Like it's going to be hard for organizations to embrace the weirdness of design, and that's where leadership is so important, is to remind the organization that the value we're bringing is this different perspective, is this different approach, and not the samey same. And that's where diplomacy is so crucial. David, did you want to do another question, or should I keep going?
No, by all means, keep going. I'm just fascinated by how much of this is relationship based and not kind of skill, traditional quote unquote skills based stuff, right?
Yes, welcome to leadership.
Yep.
And I've touched on this before. Some of what I said as a diplomat was about kind of fighting for your team. But I was, the diplomat role is if they're fighting for their team, they're doing it among peers, and so I see that as diplomacy. The advocate role is fighting for your team, kind of up and out. With executives, with other stakeholders, making sure that your team has what it needs in order to succeed. And the first thing, and one of the hardest things that design leaders, one of the hardest things it is for design leaders to do is evangelizing, tooting your horn. Design leaders often want the work to speak for itself. They feel like if they promote the work, if they evangelize for the work, then that feels kind of, I don't know, marketing-y and slimy, and it's like back patting, and it's all these things that we don't feel comfortable about. Like, it's just like, if it's good, it's obviously good, and everyone should recognize it. And the truth is they don't. People don't recognize the goodness of your work, and you do need to evangelize it. And you need to not just communicate about the amazing work your team is doing, you need to over communicate it. You want to be tired of hearing yourself evangelizing for your team. That's when you've probably done just enough evangelizing for your team, so that folks are understanding and embracing kind of the value that your team is delivering within the organization. Also, though, a key advocate, or a key role for an advocate and a design leader as they embrace their advocacy, is comfort with a very important word, and this word we will hear, well, quote unquote, hear from our friend Ron Swanson. Design leaders need to be able to say no. They need to be able to push back on requests from others that don't make sense. One of probably the biggest issue that most design teams face is that they are asked to do more work than they have people to do it. And there's two ways that you can approach that. You can either try to do all that work, Well, the solution, especially that many early design leaders embrace, is trying to do it all. They want to be seen as team players. They want to be seen, they want design to be respected as function internally. They're afraid that if they say no, that design will be seen as problematic. And so they say yes to everything. And then what happens is they stretch their team too thin. When they stretch their team too thin, the quality of the work goes down. And so now the design team is being associated with mediocre work. Instead, design leaders need to figure out how to prioritize their efforts, how to identify the things that matter and the things that don't, or that matter less, and focus their efforts on that which matters, and say no to that which doesn't matter as much. And when those people are saying, yes, but we need design, you have to say, I don't have the team, I don't have the people to do it. I'm happy to help you find it. If you've got budget, we can contract for it. If you want to help me get more headcount, great, but I'm not going to commit to doing work that we can't do well. And so design leaders need to get way more comfortable with the word no than they typically are. Designers at heart are pleasers. They want to make people happy. They want to satisfy their customer, their user, their colleagues. That's kind of part of who we are. It probably speaks to our empathetic sense. Design leaders have to figure out how to tamp that down a bit and stand strong and say no when the risk is jeopardizing the quality of the work, the happiness of your team, right? If you spread your team too thin, they're not happy with the work they're doing, or they're working too many hours. Design leaders need to be able to say no. Don't let your team get run over or spread too thin. Design leaders also need to be a champion for the work. This kind of addresses, I think, the question you were saying a little bit earlier, David. This is a role that designers want their design leaders to play that I often see design leaders not play.
Yep.
And what that means is design leaders need to be out in front of the work that their team is doing, and supporting it. What inevitably your team will share work with executives and other stakeholders, and those executives and other stakeholders are going to be critical of it. They're going to say it's not good. They're going to say it doesn't meet our needs. And sometimes that's true. And if that's true, then you go back with the team and you revise it, and you address those concerns. But often it isn't true. Often your design team has a better understanding of customers than the executives, has a better understanding of kind of their measures of success than the executives, right? You can imagine executives, they've got 100 things coming at them over the course of a day. They're giving you a slice. They're reacting almost from a gut mode in terms of what your team is showing them. And so your team, if you're doing your job right, actually is delivering, I'm sure, work that satisfies this, and still can be told, no, that's not good enough. And that's where you step in and you make the case, and you stand up to leaders and you tell them why this is good work, and you exercise your social capital in that mode. But if your executives, if those stakeholders are good at what they're doing, they'll listen. They might not back down, but they'll listen. They'll engage. They'll have a good conversation. I remember when I was at Groupon, my boss, the head of product, was upset with some work that my team had done, but he couldn't articulate why. He would just kind of castigate it. And so I took 40 minutes, had a one-on-one with him to unpack all of his concerns, write them down, really understand, push back on some of it. Receive other concerns. He was mostly concerned that our designs weren't reflecting our personality. And so, but I took that for the team. I told the team, you keep doing what you're doing. You're doing good work. I got this conversation. I didn't want them to get randomized or spun up by a stray thing that was said in a meeting. That was my responsibility, was to have that kind of difficult conversation to unpack what the executive means, yep, and then filter that.
Oh, Peter, I think we might have just lost you for a second there. Apologies if we lost Peter's audio.
Advocate needs to be relentless.
Hey, Peter.
You are going to be.
Peter,
you are going to.
I think yes, we might have lost the last 15 seconds of the last slide. Audio. Sorry about that.
Okay. All I was saying is that you just need to push back on your design, on your executives, and it's the design leader's responsibility to have those conversations, often without the rest of the team there, because executives don't often know how to talk about design. And so you can kind of work one-on-one with that executive, pull out what it is they mean when they talk about. I had one executive stakeholder in a different context say that they wanted something that was edgy, and like I can't work with edgy. My team can't work with edgy. You can't tell them edgy. They don't know how to deal with that. So I said, again, I took a one-on-one, unpacked what that executive was trying to go for, and then was able to bring that back to the team and have a much more positive conversation and interaction than my team being spun up by phrases that leaders are saying that don't really understand how to talk about design. Yeah. So then I think this is the last point around kind of advocacy for the design leader is being relentless. You are going to be told no by people in your organization. You're going to be told you can't get enough headcount. You're going to be told you can't get the equipment you want. You're going to be told that you can't have the facilities that you need, and you can't give up. You have to keep asking for it. If you allow no to just be the first no to be the end of the conversation, then you are not doing your team a service. You need to continue to figure out how to make that case for more people, better hardware, the right software, the dedicated team rooms that you need, whatever it is. You need to continue to advocate for your team in the face of people saying no. And for me, a lot of it, like I'm doing it right now, a lot of it is talking to my finance partner to understand our budgets better, so I can understand how to move money around, so I can make sure that I get the team the things that they need. So design leaders often find themselves in conversations with parts of the organization they never imagined they would be talking to: HR, finance, legal. Those become your new cross-functional peers in order to break down barriers and get the things that you need.
And part of this, Peter, I would imagine, is you as that design leader having empathy for all of them as well, kind of understanding where HR is coming from, where all those other folks are.
Well, exactly. I mean, the thing about HR, depending on the company, HR is there to cover your corporation's butt, right? Many companies talk about HR as being there to support their staff, and some companies do that. I actually think we at Snagajob do that pretty well. But their default is going to be policies and practices that protect the business, which will usually be fine, but sometimes will run contrary to what you're trying to achieve, or they just won't recognize. HR often just doesn't recognize that designers are snowflakes, as that earlier slide showed, and warrant a different mode of management and performance review than maybe what is standard. And so you end up, I've spent a lot of time working with my HR partners in reframing performance reviews, developing recruiting practices specific to design. Right, like because those folks hold the keys to those parts of the business, and again, you shouldn't just assume that design has to follow what everyone else does. You work with those partners to create approaches that make sense for design.
Yep.
So the last thing here. So I've talked about the first three archetypes of coach, diplomat, and advocate for managing down, managing across, and managing up. And there's a fourth archetype, and that archetype arrives when your team goes from being a relatively small team, let's say you've got 7 people, a design leader, and 6 other people on your team, into a design organization. At some point, your team will scale from a design team to a design org, by which, for me, I mean, that's when you have like 2 teams within it. So there's some complexity there that now needs to be managed. And when you evolve from a design team to a design org is when you click in this fourth archetype, and that is the archetype of the architect. And that is someone who is able to appropriately shape the organization as it scales, right? The architect is, as a design leader, is one who understands, going back to that initial concept of leverage, how to get leverage as the team gets too big for you to manage everybody directly, right? And so you need to start putting systems in place that allow you to manage it at scale. So one thing you're going to need to do as that architect is figure out your organizational model. There are many different ways to organize design teams. There are 2 common ones. either an internal services model, the agency model that I talked about, or a kind of Spotify style embedded model where you have a product manager, at least on the product side, product manager, designer, and 6 or 7 engineers together. Those are two models. They're not written in stone. In the book, we talk about a third model we've created called the centralized partnership. This drawing is taken from that, where essentially you organize. I advocate organizing your design organization by teams that are specific to different personas, right? So you have a buyer design team and a seller design team. So they are not embedded in the specific product teams, which are those white boxes there. They live outside of those product teams, but are in a committed relationship with those product teams. But their focus is more on the experience. That's what the yellow and green arrows are meant to suggest. Those design teams are making sure the experience hangs together as it crosses all of those product teams. This may or may not be the right organizational model for your design team, but you should be conscious and intentional about the organizational model that you engage in, and not just accept kind of what has been handed to you. An architect also needs to make sure that the roles within their organization are clearly articulated and build a levels framework for, so how are people going to progress as in your organization. Levels are something that for the longest time I hated levels frameworks. I don't like reducing people to numbers. They are a tool of HR that I felt kind of removed the humanity from my ability to manage. But I recognized as I've engaged with larger organizations, I need a levels framework to help me scale that organization successfully. And I see the right levels framework as one that feels like a scaffold and not a straitjacket. If you don't have a leveling framework within your design team and your team is greater than 10, I would say this is one of the first things you need to do after this session. Levels will help you in your recruiting and hiring practices by making clear kind of in job postings what level you're going for, and then how to assess the people that you're talking to. If you don't have a clear levels framework, it's hard to gauge the seniority of someone that you're talking to. A levels framework will help you with delivery, and that will help you figure out how to structure a team. I like to have a mix of junior to senior people on a team. If you have all juniors on one team, all seniors on another team, you're not distributing your folks appropriately. And then a levels framework will help you with your professional development, how people grow within your organization. How do you get from a junior to a mid-level to a senior to a leader? And then by having that understanding, you can point people at the right training, the right coaching that helps them grow in their desired path. I'm going to flash up a URL here, bit.ly/levels framework. We have at Snagajob, we have just published our design team levels framework that shows you going from a junior designer all the way to a VP and all the stages within. And it has 2 tracks. It has a management track as well as an individual contributor track, because I believe that you should be able to grow without necessarily taking on direct reports. So feel free to use that levels framework in your organization. Moving on. Architect,
that's great.
Part of the architect responsibility is establishing what design quality means, again, at scale, right? It's something when you're just a team of 7 and the team lead can kind of serve as a creative director and through conversation establish quality. As you scale, you need to start making quality something that is more systematized. So there's ways to do that that people are actually talking a lot about. If you're, just the whole buzz around design systems is a lot around maintaining quality in an organization as it grows. And so developing these agreed upon criteria. What are your brand standards? What are your experience principles? What are your style guides and design systems? These are there to provide kind of a guardrails for quality. But then there's also you need to recognize that quality is subjective and embrace that. And so one of the things that we do is that we've identified just examples of quality work. We currently keep it in a Padlet, examples of things that we feel hold up what we mean by quality in our organization, which might be different than other organizations. But you want to define quality through examples, not just through kind of systems and tools, so that you're kind of developing a culture of quality. right? So these are different things that we've identified, different categories that we've had of items that we think have a high degree of quality that we would aspire to. Architects also need to get serious about operations. Once you hit about 12 to 15 people on your team, you need to seriously consider bringing on someone such as a design program manager. If you've heard the phrase design ops, which is also getting current traction, that's
Oh, Peter, I'm not sure if we lost you there. Might be having a small problem with audio.
What about now?
Oh, now you're back. Great.
Okay. You need to get serious about operations as your team scales. If you do not have people whose job is to focus on the effectiveness of the team as it scales,
I think we lost you one more time, Peter. Sorry. I'm not sure what there's an internet issue or.
Yeah, I'm getting the feedback that it's I'm getting the green bar, so it's hard for me to know. And I'm hearing you okay.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
Yep, you sound great now.
Okay. Anyways, so you need to have folks whose sole job is making sure your team is effective. They're handling all the operational challenges. They're handling budgets. For me, they're handling contracts with contractors, agency relationships. They're scheduling meetings sometimes and keeping internal initiatives moving forward. We have a design systems initiative, and my design program manager is the person who makes sure that that is moving forward. So you're going to want to embrace operations as you scale. The thing to recognize is that even though we're talking about developing a set of systems to support scaling, it doesn't take the place of human interaction. You can't simply let algorithms and systems run your design team. They are there to support the running of the design team, but you're still going to have to be quite hands-on as a design leader in managing your relationships with folks. So to wrap up, these are these 4 archetypes of design leaders. You need to do all of this. Pretty much every design leader needs to be able to practice all of these things, and no, that's not fair, but it's our current reality. If you let any one of these things slide, then what happens is you're not able to kind of support your team and support design in the way that it ought to be, and that will prove problematic for you and for your team in their ability to have the kind of impact that they want. And so by framing it this way, what I've seen is that folks tend to recognize that they're strong at probably a couple of these and less strong at a couple others, and so that they can either start skills building to fill in where they are weaker, or they can maybe bring on someone and partner and collaborate with someone who's stronger at those areas that they're weaker in. But you do need to make sure design leadership is doing all 4 of these well. And with that, I thank you.
Peter, thank you. This is I am struck by what an awesome kind of template this is, not just for current design leaders, aspiring design leaders, HR and their hiring practices, just the sorts of things that they want to be sure that their design leaders are going to be really good at. This is incredible. I'm going to ask the audience if anybody's got questions for Peter or comments that you want to do. We've only got a few more minutes left before people are going to rush to their next meetings. But we've got a few more minutes, and I think we've got a question from Bill Skeet. So Bill, let me unmute you so you can ask Peter. There we go. How are you, Bill?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Great, great.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Excellent overview of this whole area that doesn't get talked about very much. And my question is, if you have any advice for when you were talking about how one of the key responsibilities of a design leader is in the advocate role, is to evangelize. And you talked a lot about how to evaluate, designers, and the fact that designers are doing things differently, and the design leader needs to do things differently. My question, I guess, is, how do you navigate how the design leader gets evaluated by their peers and by their leader? Given that they are different from other leaders, they are practicing different things. And for example, the design leader may be asked, why are you constantly evangelizing for your organization? I don't have to do that. So they don't understand, back to your point earlier, and you may have, HR that doesn't understand exactly what a design leader needs to do, and you may have peers that don't understand that, and you're tasked with just trying to make sure that they understand what your team's doing. This is a question about how do you make sure that they understand what you're doing, and that what you're doing actually makes sense.
That's an excellent question, and I don't have a good or easy answer. As you're talking, I'm realizing this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I had many conversations with heads of product or CEOs, when I've been in between jobs and figuring out what my next role would be, where it was clear that what they saw as a design leader, what they saw was essentially a creative director. They wanted someone who could be a creative visionary and help make their designs awesome. And what they didn't recognize is that design leadership is as much managerial and operational as it is creative. And if you're not attending to the management and operational aspects, that creative leadership is going to burn out. And I've seen this happen over and over again, where a company hires a head of design who's a creative visionary, and within a year, that person has moved on because their team is unhappy. They're not recruiting or hiring fast enough, because that creative leader just doesn't understand what it takes to run an org, and they're different responsibilities. And so I guess what I would say is making sure, educating folks on the breadth of the job, making it clear that in order to realize these amazing design outcomes, it's not just simply a matter of skills, design skills and design talent, but that's to be kind of use a hoary metaphor, that's the tip of an iceberg, and below the water is all this managerial and operational stuff that's setting your team up to make those amazing things. But without that below it, the team is going to kind of collapse in on itself.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Bill. So we've probably got time for one more question. I'm going to call on Josh Wohl, who is a co-founder of a company with maybe the greatest name ever. It's called Super Awesome. So Josh, let me unmute you so you can ask your question here. There you go. How are you today, sir?
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for the talk today. Very, very interesting. So my question here is. So we're at about 120 people or so, which means that from a design perspective, really the products that we've got, we're looking at like 3-4 or so designers. We're not looking at the type of team that you were describing here, and trying to figure out what a design leader really means before you've reached the stage that really there is a full team involved. So how do you go from a combination of designers to then really stepping up and taking a design lead role when the company hasn't figured out design at all? How does that differ from what you were talking about?
So you're saying that you have like 3 or 4 people on your team, and you're not yet kind of at the scale that it feels like some of what I'm talking about is quite ready. I think, well, one thing I would go back to is in all of my experience, and I would in all of my experience, design works best when there's singular leadership at the helm. That's true at the level of team and at the level of organization. And so if you don't have that leadership, that means the design function doesn't have the kind of perspective or orientation to deliver its best. It's going to be muddied. It's going to be kind of maybe not designed by committee, but it's just going to be everyone doing their own thing. If you look at any creative endeavor, films typically have one director, right? There's usually one architect who leads a product. Now there might be a lot of people involved in that creation, but you have that one point of leadership. And so I would say even at the outset, like in the book we talk about a design team of 2. One of those people is the leader. You want to identify leadership as early as possible, and then that leader kind of grows as the team grows. Now if the rest of the organization hasn't picked up on that, right, then that's a conversation that it sounds like someone like you would have with whomever you're reporting to, or other potential advocates or sponsors, to say, hey, this is serious. Design matters. We're putting a lot of onus on design to deliver, but we're not giving ourselves the ability to do our best work because we're not treating this function seriously. We need to have a dedicated leader. That leader needs to have access to our executives and the ability to engage with other parts of the organization to make sure that design is delivering to its fullest. I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but I think it's just you need to articulate kind of the importance of design leadership, because without it, you're just not getting the most out of the designers who are there.
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Joshua, I know we have to go, and so one thing I wanted to say is on this slide, my email address and my Twitter handle are there. Feel free to reach out to me if we didn't have a lot of time. My apologies for Q&A. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about these topics with anyone in my inbox. So don't hesitate.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, for the bit.ly link to show the levels for people who might want some inspiration for that, and just for a great presentation. We really appreciate you sharing out with the community today. For everybody who came and enjoyed the webinar, thank you. We appreciate you coming and listening for the hour. And have a great day, everybody. We will be sending a recording out of this shortly for anybody who wasn't able to get it. Feel free to share this with other design and product colleagues in your organizations. We'd love for them to benefit from this as well. And with that, thank you for myself, for Brittany Crown, and for everybody here at Collaborative Gain. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.